Dr. Lindsay, thank you for the invitation to come and to be here on this momentous and august moment. It is a privilege to be here. 25 years ago, this is my anniversary or reunion, homecoming reunion of 25 years. It's taken 25 years for Gordon to rediscover me and invite me back. I'm thankful for that. And since I may not get another invitation, this is such an amazing event. Would you all smile for the camera? Because I don't want to forget this. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Oh, you look great. My kids will love to see that. It's great to be here. I don't often put on a suit living in South Florida. We're mostly in t-shirts and shorts. It's the first time I've put on socks in months. I almost put on a tie this morning. Had it, brought it, prepared. I know that's kind of the style here. I almost put on a tie, but I had ringing in my head the senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, who's across the street from Knox Seminary, where he says that the devil created ties to strangle preachers. So I couldn't put it on, at least this morning. As Dr. Lindsay said, from 1987 is when I graduated. A little bit of a history. I spent probably the first 10 years in graduate school. That's not unusual, working on a master's and a PhD. After that, probably about 10 or 12 years, I was pastoring, first as a young adults pastor, and then I planted and then led Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Newport Beach, California. And that was the inspiration for the book, Deep Church. When I heard that Dr. Lindsay told me that had inspired a series here called Deep Faith, and when InterVarsity had asked me to slightly tweak the title because Deep Christianity was a little too close to Deep Church, I stole your title back and called it Deep Faith, In Search of Deep Faith. So I was glad to be able to have the inspiration go back both ways. 2010, after 10 years of church planning, we felt it was time to step out of Redeemer. We had done what God had called us to do, which was to plant a healthy, vibrant church that remains that way 2 years after we've been gone. And we just decided to drop out for a year and move our whole family to Oxford, England, and then also to spend some time in Europe. The goal was to take a whole year and spend 6 months of those in Oxford and then another 6 months traveling or wandering around, being gypsies of sorts around Europe for two reasons. One, we were wiped out. We were tired. I particularly was tired after church planning. But the bigger reason was we wanted to introduce our kids to deep faith. And I wanted to take them over the course of a year to 10 or 12, or I should say to study in depth 10 or 12 of the great heroes of my faith. Everyone from C.S. Lewis to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, William Wilberforce, Corrie ten Boom, to name a few. And as we began to do this, one of the reasons we began to do this is I had been reading for a number of years the work of Christian Smith, who is also a Gordon graduate and has done some amazing work through the National Study on Youth and Religion. And let me just, before I jump into that, that's us in front of our house. No, actually, that's actually Blenheim Palace, where Churchill was born. I had been reading Christian Smith, and one of the things that he's got a couple books out, Soul Searching, Souls in Transition, Lost in Transition, things like that, where he really lays out a picture of young emerging adults that's not completely depressing, but not always very encouraging. And I had been reading that for years, and it kind of worried me that my kids were going to grow up and not have a strong enough faith to sustain themselves when they got out into college. And so we wanted to make sure that wouldn't happen, and we wanted to take this year to kind of give a turbo boost, if you will, to their faith. Well, there's this moment of transition, according to Christian Smith and his researchers. One of the best places to look at it is in the Gospel of John, because the disciples face this point as well. There's this great scene, chapter 20 of John, is about the resurrection, and as soon as after Mary Magdalene sees Jesus. She goes back and she finds all the disciples in the upper room, and they're scared, they're paranoid, they're worried, they're anxious. Their Savior, their Redeemer, their leader has been crucified and is in a tomb. And they are at this point where they're saying, we've got to give up everything that we've believed, and we now have to follow what the Roman Empire says, and we've got to follow their story, their narrative, because our narrative is dead. And it's at that moment when they are there, when Jesus appears, verse 19. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And it's at that moment when he said this to them. He said, and he showed them his hands and his side. In the text, there's this pause. There's this moment. So remember, Jesus walks in. I don't think they quite recognize him. They don't quite understand who this is. They're not sure if it's a ghost. They're not sure what's happening. The resurrected body looks different. And there's a moment where they're not sure they're going to believe that the narrative is now back on, that it's true. And I think that's why he shows them the hands and the side. But I'm going to hold off for a minute and tell you to pick up the story as we go. So there's this moment of transition in John 20. I think all college students face this moment. It's a moment where they've got to decide what they believe. They come out of their home and they've been taught certain things, raised in a tradition, raised in the faith maybe, given some aspects of the faith, and they go off to college, and now they face a fairly hostile environment. Not at Gordon, obviously, but at a lot of secular schools. And they've got to decide what they believe. And according to the studies, 90% choose the narrative that's around them. They don't want to risk success. So whatever, they don't want to speak out for their faith. They don't want it to be integrated in their lives, because if they do, they may sacrifice or they may put in jeopardy their success in school, which then leads to good jobs and then leads to all the wealth and the American dream that they want. And so they pipe down, they be quiet, and what they end up doing is they put their identity into a lockbox. And they put it away, according to the research, for 4 years and don't take it out, don't think about it. In other words, they stop worrying or even thinking about who they are anymore, and they adopt the narrative or the story of the university, the American dream, whatever it may be that's around them, and their identity that they were raised with is put in a lockbox. They stop growing, they stop experiencing, they begin to forget who they were. And this can happen even at a place at Gordon. It's very easy to get wrapped up in, I've got to get grades, I've got to go to graduate school, I've got to get those recommendations when I'm done, I want the best job, I want to be successful, I want my friends to like me. Whatever it is, it's very easy to take what our parents have instilled in us and put it inside of a lockbox. Unfortunately, according to Christian Smith and his team, Lost in Transition, the dark side of emerging adulthood, the results are not good. As they have tracked these kids and studied them from when they were early teens all the way now into their 20s, they've discovered a handful of things. The first thing they've discovered is as these kids go through college and get out of college, is that they're morally aimless. They're not amoral. They're not necessarily terrible kids. They're just aimless. Nobody's taught them how to think morally, how to reason morally, how to think through difficult issues. And so everything is kind of ad hoc. They take a little bit here, a little bit there, take a little bit from inside. They make decisions that are basically to help them feel good about life, to be happy about life. That's about it. But when the researchers began to push them on moral issues, tough moral issues, whether it be slavery, modern day slavery, for instance, lying, cheating, whatever it was, they didn't have the skills or the apparatus to be able to think through it. And the more that they asked these philosophical questions, the more puzzled looks they got, like, what are you talking about? They just had no tools to be able to think through. Second, they found that they're in messed up relationships. They haven't learned about trust. They haven't learned about forgiveness. They haven't learned about commitment. And they've got just a long list of broken relationships, either love relationships, dating relationships, through the hookup culture, or in their own families. And they just don't have the tools and the resources to be able to know what it means to forgive. And so they've got lots of pain in their lives because of that. Because they have no greater story than the one that the university tends to give them, they tend to have nothing really big or any large destination to live for, and so they tend to be materialistic and consumeristic just simply by default. That's all they're given. They're told they've got to get good grades, they got to get a good job, they got to get the American dream. So what's left? There's nothing bigger to live for. There's no cause. There's no eternal truth to live for. And so the only thing that's left is materialism and consumerism. I was teaching this in a seminary class, and one of my students found this picture for me when you come out of the runway at the Pittsburgh International Airport. I am what I shop. Of course you are. What else could you be? There isn't a whole lot left in our culture beside that, because we've pushed the eternal and all the important things to the side. So you are what you shop. They also found that they tend to be binge drinkers, where there's not a whole lot to live for. It's easy to go out and just get drunk on Friday and Saturday nights. And this one surprised me. There was little interest in social and political life. We hear about Gen Y being really interested in social issues, but the studies are not bearing it out. They're mostly concerned with their own lives, their own circle of friends, their Facebook, their Twitter following, and feeling good about life in that little group, and they don't have much interest in the larger world, in larger causes, which is sad. So the question is, who is at fault? Who's to blame? Some just simply blame the kids. They're morally, they're relativistic, they're individualistic, it's all their fault. But what I found about what was interesting about Christian Smith's research is he said that it's actually the parents in the church that are most to blame. Now, as a pastor and a parent, I sat up when I was reading this. What do you mean it's the parents' fault? We try hard. What do you mean it's the church? We're doing all kinds of great things. What's going on? He says what's happened is in our country is we've infected our children with what's called MTD, moralistic therapeutic deism. How many have heard of this? Some of you may have heard of this in your class. Says what they found out is that even though that a large majority of kids were somewhat religious, it was the religion of MTD, not historic, creedal, traditional Christianity, that they had been given a feel-good, kind of do-good religion. They were taught to do good, but with a strong emphasis on feeling good about themselves and their lives. And in some ways, Christianity for them, religion had become something like a hobby, something like eating, or even something even more silly like eating vegetables. Like eating vegetables growing up, your parents say, is a good thing, but when you get to college, what do? You stop eating vegetables because you have choice. Well, religion was a good thing in high school and provided you some friends and some good environments. But so many young people get to college and they say, but I don't need it now. I have a choice. There's more important things to help me to get through life. The question is, can it be escaped? In part, we took our family to England and Europe to find out if it could be escaped. But many say no. Once they're infected with MTD in junior high and high school and they grow up with that, then it's very, very hard to get out of that. Some 90% don't. They're not able to get their identity out of the lockbox. But I'm not quite so pessimistic. I think they can. But it's going to take them, the student, the young person, to be gripped by a completely new story. One where the narrative is much bigger than the narrative being taught in the university culture or in our culture at large. A story that is so big that it grabs us and encompasses us and impels us out into the world in a whole new way. I am super thankful that I was able to get that kind of story here at Gordon. Let me go back to the text first. Jesus is going to show them the hands, as I said. And then he says, then the text writer, then John says, right after they see the hands in the side of Jesus, then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. Isn't that interesting? They saw the Lord. For the first time, they see the Lord and finally realize that the gospel narrative is true. And it opens their eyes. And a few things happen. First, they were able to see. They don't put their identities in a lockbox in order to survive in the Roman Empire. They become bold, and certainly after Pentecost, they become so bold that they turn the entire Roman Empire upside down. Christians go from the smallest of minorities to the largest of minorities in the entire world. They end up changing the world. And whenever the gospel has gripped people, when it's gotten into their hearts, into their minds, into their very souls, it has turned the world upside down. I think of William Wilberforce and the great evangelical revival through John Newton and through George Whitefield. That when it got into people's lives, this story was so much bigger, so much greater, that it ended up turning upside down the Western world. And that's what happens when Christianity gets into our lives. One of my favorite stories let me say this. One of my favorite authors is C.S. Lewis. How many like C.S. Lewis and have read at least one of his books? A fantastic writer. We spent a whole month in Oxford looking at Lewis. We read the Chronicles of Narnia together. We went to the Eagle and Child pub. We went to Magdalen College where he taught. We did all kinds. We just followed the C.S. Lewis trail. One of my great thrills was to be able to spend 24 hours in the Kilns, which is the Lewis house for 30 years, and actually, hush silence over the crowd, actually sleep in C.S. Lewis's bedroom. That's like better than the Lincoln bedroom at the White House. It was very cool. It was fun. I was lying there at night, ready to go to bed that first night, and I just did not want to go to sleep. And I thought, my goodness, if I fall asleep now, the night is over, and I'll never, ever pass this way again. Have you ever had that experience where you don't want a day to end or you don't want a moment to end? It was an incredible experience. At the end of that wonderful month of looking at Lewis, it just so happened that the Dawn Treader was coming out into the theaters. How many have read the Dawn Treader, the Narnia Chronicles? Phenomenal way of shaping children and adults' imaginations. My favorite character is Lucy. I think most people think of the Dawn Treader, they think of Eustace, and when he's getting de-dragoned. Do you remember that scene? Becomes a dragon because he's after the gold, and then it's by Aslan's. Basically, he tries to take the dragon skin off, but he can't, and then it's only Aslan's claws that can take it off. And then after that, he's thrown into the water, almost to symbolize baptism. It's a great scene. But one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the Book of Incantations. Do you remember the scene? And did you see the movie? How many saw the movie? If you've seen the movie, it's not a spoiler alert. Everybody in the movie is going through certain temptations, and Lucy is being tempted at this point. And she's asked by these little invisible men that jump on one leg to go into this invisible house and to find this invisible book called the Book of Incantations and find the spell that will undo the spell of invisibility. And so she goes in there and she finds the book. And there's this great scene in the movie where she finds the spell for snow, and all of a sudden, right inside of the mansion, the snow starts coming down. It's beautiful movie magic at its best. Then she finds this spell, which is the spell to make you the finest or the most beautiful person in your family. Now, Lucy struggled with her looks, we know that, and who in her family did she really want to be like? She wanted to look like her beautiful older sister, Susan. That's who she wanted. So as she looks at the mirror on the right side, she actually sees, that's a picture of Susan, I would imagine. She looks in the mirror and she doesn't see herself, she sees Susan. My goodness, she can say this spell and become as beautiful as Susan is. It is her moment. It is an intense moment. It's that lockbox moment where she's going to put away her identity and take on the identity of someone else, the story of someone else. Just as she's being tempted for that, she resists it for a moment, and you remember she tears the page out, folds it, and sticks it in her pocket. And right at that moment, Aslan roars. You can't see him, but he roars, almost as if it's the conscience of the Holy Spirit, saying what you're doing is not on the right track. Well, I was really curious, what are they going to do with this scene? And we didn't have to wait long. The next scene, she's on the Dawn Treader. She's getting ready for bed. She pulls out the page of the magic incantation. And what does she do? She says the spell. And at that moment, she becomes Susan. She goes over to the mirror. She looks at herself in the mirror, and she's Susan. She's beautiful. She ends up pushing on the mirror and walking through a door. The next thing she knows, she's with her brother Peter and Edmund at their fancy party. It looks like a roaring 20s party. And everybody adores her. She's Susan. She's beautiful. She's like a starlet, like a Hollywood starlet. And then she says, well, where's Lucy? And they're like, Lucy who? Well, your sister. They don't know anything about her. And all of a sudden, she kind of freaks out. The next thing, she's back on the Dawn Treader, and Aslan's standing right next to her. And Aslan says to her, Lucy, you wished yourself away. You've got to give yourself more credit. You have value. You were the one who introduced your brothers and sister to Narnia. And it's a great moment, and you feel good and all that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, yeah, it's a great movie moment, and there's truth to it. But what Aslan just did was give her more MTD. I mean, I understand the movie makers take liberties and all that, but he basically said, you need to feel good about yourself. You need to do good. You've already done good. You need to do more. And that's all. And those are good messages. We do need to feel good and do good. The problem is those are not strong enough to resist the temptations that come through life to adopt and live in a greater worldview, a greater narrative, and a greater story. This was the picture of her looking in her temptation. And there's Aslan talking to her. Well, I was really curious. I had to go back. I was like, is this how it happened in the book? So I went back and I picked up the copy of the Dawn Treader and I read it. And I began to realize that it was a little different. Lewis doesn't do it that way. In the book, unlike the movie, the book does not portray it this way. At the moment she's tempted to say the beauty spell, she sees Aslan's face on the page and hears his growl. Startled, she turns the page, frightened by Aslan, and chastised for her moral lapse. Right away, she discovers what's called the spell for the refreshment of the spirit. But actually, it's more than just refreshment, and it's more than just a spell. It's actually a story, and the story goes on for 4 whole pages. After a while, she realizes that she's actually living in the story, as if it were real. And when she gets to the end of it, she wants to relive it, and she tries to turn the pages back. But if you remember from the movie and the book, you can't go backwards in this spell book. It only goes one way, so she can't turn it back. And right at that moment, as she gives up. She finds the spell to make things all visible again. She says it, and to her surprise, who appears? Aslan. Aslan appears, and she's glad to see him, and she says to him, shall I ever be able to read the story again? Will you tell it to me, Aslan? Oh, do. And he says this to her, indeed, Lucy, yes, I will tell it to you for years and years. What is Lewis doing here? He is saying that the spell of refreshment, this story that we want told to us once we experience, is so much greater than the spell to be tempted to adopt a different narrative in our lives. And once you have been gripped by that story, you will want to hear it over and over and over and over again. It will become the very words of life to you, the very thing that empowers you, the very thing that calls you and sends you out, the very, very thing that gives you life. It is the words of life. And I'm thankful. I don't know if I had these moments of lockbox mania when I was here. I'm sure I did. But I am thankful for professors like Dr. Bill Harper, Louis Lugo in my life, Stan Gady, who when I hit those moments reminded me, like Aslan, and told me the great story, the old story, over and over and over again. How do you avoid the lockbox? How do you avoid the narratives of the world that want to pull you into those desires and not the desires of the kingdom? By being gripped by the old story over and over and over again. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the fact that you have called us into a grand story, and it is the great story. And we pray that it transforms us, gives us new life, gives us a calling that is so big that there is no time to be bored. There is no time to be distracted or tempted by false liturgies of desire, false narratives or stories, but that this one so reshapes our desire, our love for you in the kingdom, and our calling for you, that our lives are nothing but a grand adventure. And I pray for these students here that Gordon will represent that. Lay that foundation for them. For the parents who are here, that they will experience that all over again. And that this will be a community that is so gripped by this amazing story that it goes on to change not only the individuals that are here, but the whole world. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.